privilege and honor with my friend Rihan being able to lead the women's initiative, and we've been continuing the tradition of sharing the love. So who knows what share the love is? Nobody? Okay, you do? Okay, one person, alhamdulillah. So share the love, alhamdulillah, has been a tradition that the IC has been continuing on for 12 years, right? And basically, we spend this time during January, February to gather items for women in shelters, for women and children in shelters, right? A lot of these women and children have been displaced because of COVID, because of um, because of certain crises that are happening in New York, right? Because of political climate and certain reasons. And we really want to be the ones who can say, okay, our community is here and we're going to support you, right? So who's subscribed to the IC mailing list? All right. So if you look in your mailbox, you've probably received an email called Share the Love. And if you haven't, I'm going to be passing around my iPad with QR codes that send you to the Amazon wish list, right? And so these Amazon wish lists is not something random that we made up with. These are actually the items that the shelters need for the new families that are coming in, right? So when you scan the QR code, you pass it around. When you scan the code, it's going to send you to the wish list, and there's going to be say like baby diapers, baby jackets, baby monitors. There's going to be sanitary products, different things that we really need them to have, inshallah, so they can spend at least this winter warm, nourished, and fed, right? And I hope, inshallah, you guys take the time to share this drive widely. And inshallah, they get the items that they need. And our deadline is going to be February 10th.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll announce it again before we leave and recirculate the email list. We've been doing this for 12 years. A lot of you know our community also operates its own domestic violence shelter in the Bronx. We have a DV agency called Pillars of Peace. I've been working here for 20 years, alhamdulillah. And within that, I would say one of the unfortunate consistencies that comes up week to week are many people who reach out who are survivors of gender-based violence, abuse. They're in the shelter systems. This is the first year we've done this in 12 years where we actually haven't gotten a lot of people to purchase things. And there could be a variety of reasons as to why that's the case. But when you go on this wish list, the purchasing of these products for any one individual might be a lot to do on their own. But when there's hundreds, if not thousands of us doing this, it creates that much more of an ease. And at the other end, what you're offering to people is not just a diaper for their kid who literally otherwise will not have one. Do you know? So you can imagine what it's like if you experience COVID here in New York and you have to wear the same face mask for like a week or a month. If you have a 2-month-old that has to wear the same diaper for a week or just no diaper at all, and how that has implications not only back to the child, if they'll develop illnesses, rashes, all kinds of things because it's not sanitary for them, or they'll get kicked out of housing because it's not sanitary to live in that state. It creates a lot of different predicaments. We're not just talking about women who don't have foundational hygiene products that they need. But fundamentally, what's happening is at the other end of it, when they receive this, they don't have an expectation that anybody's thinking about them. And what you're offering to a person in that moment is a recognition that they're actually seen and they haven't been forgotten. And the goal isn't to stick them in a building somewhere where we're not uncomfortable with the realities that we do have orphans in our communities and widows in our communities and people who are without shelter in our communities or access to just basic things in our communities. And it's easier for us to erase identities and narratives by placing them where we don't have to think about them. So you have the opportunity, like we're fasting on Mondays and Thursdays here and having iftar, which means You don't have to buy like breakfast and lunch. Save a few dollars and buy some diapers for some kid whose mother will feel that much more grateful. And those are not people whose du'as you want to be without when you stand in front of Allah. Does this make sense? And if you really want to interject ihsan into it, you grab the iPad, and even if you don't have the money to donate something, you take a picture of that QR code and you just send it everywhere that you can. Last Ramadan, our community raised $4.8 million from over 48,000 unique donors, right? We have a large community, alhamdulillah. Everybody in our community is not poised to donate to something. There's a lot of people in our community who are very wealthy, and there's people in our community who are homeless, and everything in between, right? May Allah make it easy and connect us at the level of hearts. So to get to 48,000 unique donors, that means a lot of people are sharing links. And you'd have to think, like, what gets in the way where I can't snap a QR code and send it to people and understand, like, distinctively that my only mode of contribution is not a monetary one. And when you read Hadith that tell you things like Jannah is at the feet of mothers, that means Jannah is at the feet of those mothers too, right? Yes or no? So in understanding it at a level that says, well, what creates like an obstacle for me, and how do I think deeply about my tradition? There shouldn't be any one of us that doesn't like do something. The average statistically for just sharing a link is a $36 yield. You know, $36 will go a long way for somebody who doesn't have money for diapers and hygiene products and care packages, right? So let's make sure that all of us are either contributing or taking a picture and sharing it with people, and with just a sense of mahabba, love, not guilt, because then you're giving to make yourself feel better, not understanding how Allah makes you a means through being a means to make someone else's life better. And they're not being helped because they're helpless. It's just circumstances. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So, you know, let's try to make sure that this isn't the first year we don't meet like our quotas, right? And that would be like for our community a big problem, you know? So you got WhatsApp groups, like social media, whatever it is, like send it to people and understand it's an opportunity for us more than anything. Okay. So if we can go to the hadith, hadith number 15, if people want to pick it up. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, like falyakul khayran aw liyasmut. We've been looking at this for like 2 or 3 weeks now. We spent the first time talking a lot about what this construct means, man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, a belief specifically mentioned of all of the theologies the Prophet could have mentioned. He mentions a belief in Allah on the last day. We talked about that for a good chunk of time. Last week, we talked about the importance of silence, or maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't remember. We talked about, like, what are the different categories then speech could fall into, right? And we mentioned 3, khair, shar, and laghu. So something that's good, something that's evil, and something that's just futile. It has no benefit or detriment, right? We want to pick up from there. So just to begin, can somebody read the hadith? It's Arabic, it's English. You could read either or, not both and. But you want to start like these other hadith that we've been looking at over the last year plus to like memorize these, interject them into your heart concretely so they're informing behaviors and actions and choices. Do you know? So can somebody read it for us, the Arabic or the English or both?
I can read Arabic.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم
قال
من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليكرم الجار ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليكرم ضيفه.
جزاك الله خير. Can somebody read the English? Yeah, go ahead.
Let him who believes in Allah in the last day speak good, or keep silent. And let him who believes in Allah in the last day be generous to his neighbor. And let him who believes in Allah in the last day be generous to his guest.
Okay. So if we have these 3 possible categories of speech, right? Khair, shar, and laghu, good, bad, and futility, what are then the possible scenarios of how our speech can kind of manifest in these categories? Does that make sense? Like, how can you understand then the way specific phrases, conversations can then be placed within these categories considerations? Does the question make sense? Yeah. So what are the different ways now? If we have these three categories, how can we then like build out an understanding of the possible scenarios these categories can kind of manifest? Does the question make sense? So yeah.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. Like if I'm speaking, how can my speech like be described through these categories? Khair, shar, and laghu. Like what are the different ways my speech can potentially exist in these categorical kind of frames? Like, for example, I could say something and my speech, you could say, fits in completely to being khair, right? What are other ways that my speech could then be?
Lahu or the other two?
Okay, so you can have khair, you can have something that's completely laghu and completely shar. Is there any other scenario?
Does it also matter like how you say it, like your tone?
Yeah, it could. But like how is there like anything beyond those three modes? The answer is yes. Like what is another way?
Silent.
Like, huh?
Silent.
No, it's got to be one of these three.
Combination of all three? Yeah.
Okay. Well, we said laghu means what?
Like no purpose.
Yeah, so it's got no benefit or detriment. So laghu can only be purely like laghu because it has no benefit or detriment, right? So then the combination is of what? Good and bad. Something has the ability to have khair and shar in it simultaneously. Do you know? So if I can now take these three categories, khair, shar, and laghu, and I have four possible scenarios in which they outcome in my speech, either khair purely, shar purely, or laghu purely, or a combination of khair and shar, right? That means of the four scenarios, three of them are not completely khair. Make sense so far? So there's a good chance, if you look at it from a probability standpoint, that what's coming out of my mouth will need more consciousness to ensure that it's like a purely khair based system. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Because it's really easy to have like 75% of this potentially be not khair, means that the likelihood of that being the manifestation is greater than like the 25% that is like only khair. Do you see? So the connection between khair and like samt is understood here if 1 out of 4 chance, maybe not chances, but do you get what I mean, is going to be purely khair. This is why like the option of silence is important to understand, because 3 out of the 4 possible scenarios are going to be identifiably not purely khair. Do you see? Of those 3 that are not purely khair, there can be a blend of what is like outward and inward sometimes, right? Intention can kind of get skewed, mixing khair and shar together, or we could have a conversation. Like you could be arguing with somebody, do you know? Especially if it's somebody who means something to you. You're sitting on the train and somebody like bumps you or you bump someone. It's a lot easier to say sorry to somebody that you'll likely never see again in your life. Think about how many times you grew up and elders in your life apologized to you. Might not have happened so much. It didn't mean that they didn't have a reason to apologize, but they just didn't say sorry. Do you know? Gratitude expressions, expressions of love and affection. Our Prophet ﷺ told the children in his life that he loves them. It's just very clearly there. And words, language, speech, it's a very integral part to our tradition. If you have someone that you're really close to, like really deep relationship, and you have an argument, in the argument, you have full opportunity to be saying things that are khair, like good, and shar, that are not good. Do you know? I could get to a place where there's a sense of understanding and I'm throwing out stuff that's good to say, even if there's argumentation. I don't appreciate that you did this or this to me, right? Nothing wrong with saying something in that mode. And then the person said, well, you did this, and now my emotions escalate, and I say like all kinds of things that are horrendous. It's all embedded within like one conversational moment that can intertwine these elements of khair and shar, right? And you want to be mindful of that because it has an ease of interjection into the conversation, especially ones that are like drawn out and longer, that then stop being about what you were talking about, but every word is still being written down by these angels, right? May Allah make it easy for us. Do you know? That sense of mindfulness that goes into the exertion of khair requires us to understand a little bit, like scenario-wise, that is not an exhaustive list, but we can start deliberating as individuals by communal interactions. If I was to start sharing for myself, like what are examples of speech that are khair? Things that are good. What would those things be? Do you know? Well, let's do this. If you turn to the person next to you, somebody walks in and says, what's like khair speech? Do you know? What kind of things are good to say? How would we start to identify some of those things? Does the question make sense? Let's turn the person next to us. More people have trickled in. Share some names if you don't know the names of the people sitting next to you. And let's start like group thinking in this mode. Like, what is khair speech, right? How can I identify that explicitly, even at an outward level? Do you know? The inner part to it, intentionally, we can talk about the way we've understood. We don't want to look at these hadiths separately. Innamal a'malu binniyat, like applies here, right? But let's just say from the outward manifestation, what are some examples and scenarios of things that we can say would be more likely than not speech that is good, like speech that is khair? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's talk about it for a few minutes and we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's different intention. It's like it's not funny intention because sometimes intention is good. Because it depends on the idea. Intended, but I think generally someone giving up like this intention is actually terrible. Like I was just gonna say, you can say like even like sports.
And I can tell like that. I can sense
Okay, so what are some of the things we're talking about? What are some of the things that we can understand around this? Like, what are examples of speech that are khair? What do we discuss? Yeah.
We talked, our main takeaway was that like if it's in the context, if any speech is in the context of like Islam or like if Allah is involved in the intention of it, then more than likely it's clear.
Okay. Other thoughts?
We discussed the same. We said that the intention should be good, but also the way that we conduct the speech should be like good and respectful. Because even if you're saying something that's really good, but you're saying it like in a harsh way or a mean way, you're making people distancing themselves from you, especially if you're talking about religion. It's just like you're making them hate the religion. as if you're just giving them some like order to do instead of like a kind advice.
Yeah, great. Right. So Christian was saying like your tone, non-verbalized aspects of communication. What else? What? Yeah. Communicating your love for someone. Okay. Other thoughts? Yeah.
So I was just sharing with them that I went to this conference this weekend. It was like a Muslim tech conference, and there were a lot of really amazing people speaking about what they did. And there were certain topics that I just really loved and was attracted to, and then there were others that I was less attracted to. And the ones that I was attracted to were conversations where these people were just so inherently beautiful in the decisions that they made with the skills that they were given, that the speech was just so much more beautiful. So it was very rooted in what they're doing, what their purpose is, and they took what God endowed them with and basically used it to better our ummah and the decision that we made versus other people who are using the same sort of language, like they would say Alhamdulillah, God bless me, etc. But their decisions were based more on how can this benefit me and my and myself, and the speech was different. And so I think we know naturally what khair is because we're naturally attracted to it, because it's just a demonstration of what is internally internalized in us, whether it's intention or other manifestations of the work that we're doing inside of us.
Great. MashaAllah. Other thoughts on this? Do you see how like the conversation is not only about like specifics in the sense of it's just always good to X, Y, and Z, but scenarios, situations like become important to understand. Does that make sense? Right? And anything has a capacity to get into a place where it now intertwines. Seemingly the content enough is not what's going to render impact, but all these other aspects of communication. I talk a lot. I don't know if you notice, right? But in like most gatherings that we have here, Lord forgive me for it. Like I'm speaking to everything, 93% of impact from content, from communication is about non-verbalized aspects of communication. 7% is rooted in the actual words and content. So it's not lost on us that so much of our tradition describes a Prophet ﷺ who was honest and a person of integrity and very calm and forbearant and these kinds of things. These things impact communication as well. The Quran gives us a framework of a variety of subject matters, inclusive of ethics. And in particular, the Quran is a text that's very conscious of itself. It's an oral tradition and is going to give us insight on how it is that our speech should also be conducted. If you can look at Surah Al-Ahzab, the 33rd chapter of the Quran, verse 70. So 33:70. And you want to start to know, like, where is this in the Quran and how do I build a relationship with verses? Because the text is going to provide for us not like specific insights on things. It's not going to say, here's like the answer to world hunger, but it's going to say, this is how you should engage like people who are hungry. It's not going to tell you, you should specifically marry this person. It'll give you an ethical framework in which you can then be empowered to make decisions and choices. Does somebody have this verse 33:70? Yeah, can somebody read it? The Arabic, the English? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll read it in English.
Great.
All you who have believed, fear Allah and speak words of appropriate justice.
Great. Anyone can read the Arabic? Just as one verse. Yeah, go ahead. Great, right? So when you have this like qaf, lam, for those who are not familiar, like, and we have these in a lot of the surahs that are short, and we read them, right? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Like that qul in the imperative is say, like it's talking about speech. So you have here qulu qawlan is utilizing the same etymological root in both of these words. It's addressing people of Iman, and the hadith that we're looking at is also framed around principles of Iman, right? Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir. People who have Iman in Allah in the last day. And it's giving a distinction. You're Muslim, you should aspire to speak like this. To say a word that is sadid, the translations lose nuance, right? In Arabic, when something is sadid, it means it's right on target. You know, the arrow hits the bullseye, that's sadid. So the words you are using are not just appropriate in terms of the content, but it's also the right time, the right place to be saying it. Do you know? And there's sometimes people can invoke Allah and invoke like Islam, and it doesn't make any sense. It's inappropriate, right? So you're in a place where, you know, I'll give you an example. Like people present things very matter-of-factly. Do you know? They might, out of their own anxiety, say things that don't make sense. Sometimes they say it like in a really problematic way. We had a young woman in our community. Her father, unfortunately, tried to commit self-harm. She was dealing with the reality of visiting him. Alhamdulillah, he was fine, and he's fine now too. But she had to see him in the hospital like this. And she came to see me, not just because of the challenges that came up with like viewing her father in this mode, but she said when she talked to her friends, somebody said to her, doesn't your dad know suicide is haram? Aside from the fact that like makes no sense to say something like that generally, the statement itself is not false, right? But its appropriateness is attached to what? Like the context and scenario does not make sense. Do you see what I mean?
Like there's a time and a place to say something.
And this is what this verse is saying, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, right? Ittaqillah, that have taqwa of Allah, wa qulu qawlan sadida, and say a word that is sadid. And when you put these things together, how would the Prophet not like tell us, right? فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ, that speak khair, good, or act in such a way that you have the absence of the ability to talk. And that non-verbalized aspect of communication is going to be critical here. The time and the place has to make sense. Whether you're talking to an audience of one, whether you're talking to an audience of thousands, you can be in a conference and the speaker is empowering. You can be in the conference and the speaker is just fundamentally using the same words, but doesn't really come across the same way, even when you talk to yourself. If you can look up this hadith that we've looked at other times, but it's relevant here. So Google hadith on speech and limbs, Limbs. And so just in the interest of time, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anh, he narrates that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam said, when the son of Adam wakes up in the morning, all of his limbs defer to the tongue. And they say, fear Allah regarding us, for we are only a part of you. If you are upright, we are upright. If you are crooked, we are crooked. But the limbs are invoking the tongue that in the morning you're awake, right? Like think about the scenario. A new day is ahead of you. The body in its entirety is engaging the one thing that can bear influence on you, how you speak to yourself. Like, don't say anything that's going to make us hate the day ahead. If you speak well, we will be well. If you speak poorly, we will exist in a poor state. Our Prophet ﷺ, he starts the day, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'dama amatana wa ilayhi nushur. The first word he's saying when he wakes up is Alhamdulillah. And the way Abir is talking about this word Alhamdulillah is he's saying Alhamdulillah in like an egocentric way or in a way that is not egocentric. Do you get what I mean? And the Prophet is saying it in a way that is not in an unhealthy manner centering the self, but understands that the conversation, وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, say it at the right time and the right place, applies also not just to how I talk to you one-on-one, how I talk to you in a group setting, but how I talk to myself. And I got to speak khair to myself. Do you understand? You think about, you wake up on whatever morning, man, I don't want, like, this day is gonna, this and that, right? And the day is gonna also have that experience. If words did not have impact, you wouldn't be moved by words when you hear them recited, and you don't even sometimes like know the language. You can stand in the late hours of the night in Ramadan, may Allah bless us to reach it, and like see people who are visibly moved. And their visible movement is not just because they're crying. People can be moved and they're not crying also. But in understanding the impact that you don't have to know the words for it to like actually engage you in a way, you are having the experience of timeless like words engaging your heart after almost a month of like engaging in less consumption and feeding of the physical and more consumption of feeding the inward, this inner selves. And you're just experiencing it differently, right? And that's when you become more bold in your du'as and whatever else. But it all goes back to words and language. Do you see? وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. And in this hadith, it's attached also to time. The Prophet is telling you specifically, in the morning, the limbs like beseech the tongue. He's not saying at the end of the night, in the middle of the day. You wake up in the morning, that tenor and tone you're setting is going to have now residual impact on the rest of it. The states that you're getting up in the morning is going to be impacted then in turn by what? How you slept the night before, the kind of things you ate, the company you keep, all of this stuff that has capacity to continue to perpetuate, right? وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. So a reflective point, is this the time for me to be saying this thing? Like, is it the best time for me to open my mouth or should I not? It doesn't mean I never say it, but how is the person going to receive, right? Two aspects to communication, giving and receiving. You're not just throwing words at a wall hoping they stick. There's an actual human being on the other end. And even if the conversation is introspective, you are a person, you are impacted by your language. وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا has to come back to you as well as the others you're talking to, right? And the hadith pairs scenarios together. So it's going to talk about the ikram of the jar and the daif. They're actual people, right? The neighbor and the guest, like conceptually, like it's telling you things are being done in relationship kind of modes. Do you see? Does this make sense? And it starts with how you speak, because how you speak is going to set the tenor for how you treat your neighbor. How you speak is going to set the tenor for how you treat the guests. Do you understand? It all goes back to words. You pump in negative, 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 it's going to be negative. You feed yourself with negative, 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 it's going to be negative. And if there's not a sense of timeliness or an awareness of it that even interrupts intrusive automated thoughts by saying, I know this is where I'm vulnerable and insecure. This is where shaitan's going to get me. And just take a breath with consciousness, like a mindfulness rooted in theology that informs perspective. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu is not just a random phrasing. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir coincides very nicely, the hadith and the verse, because you exert conviction-driven thoughts more often through conscious awareness and not through default settings and mindlessness. And mindlessness is when you start hating on yourself more, and then you feel it and you just start putting that out to everybody. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? If we look at Surah 61, verse 2. So this is Surah As-Saf, its second verse. Somebody have it? I'm going to read it. Yeah, go ahead.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا لم تقولون ما لا تفعلون.
Okay, and what's the translation? You can do it. Yeah, go.
You believe, why do you say what you do not do?
Great. It's again informing a relationship with speech, but now it attaches speech to like action. Speech in and of itself isn't action, but distinguishing speech as an action from actions that now fundamentally don't coincide with speech. But it's giving us an ethic and etiquette around speech. It's not applicable in scenarios that we want to come up with that are not relevant. My father is paralyzed on the right side of his body. May Allah grant him shifa. And he doesn't have the ability to speak. May Allah make it easy for him. For 7 years, he hasn't been able to like speak a word. Do you know? Let's assume that he could, right? If my father told me, like, you should prostrate in your prayer, I can't say to him, why are you telling me that which you don't do? Aside from the fact that that would be the most obnoxious thing to say, right? That's not what the verse means. Do you know? And is there a value add still to me telling somebody to not do something that I myself don't do, or to do something that I am not doing, right? Like, yeah, you know, you want to be in a place where the aspiration is that people exceed you. I want my kids to be like better at life than I am. I don't want to like have them live in a shadow, but I would find joy in a student of mine like excelling rather than finding discomfort, right? May Allah make us people who celebrate the achievements of others and not engage in envy and jealousy and hasad that kills our heart more than anything. But in understanding, like, what's the verse telling us? It's giving us an understanding of like speech again. Like, what is good speech? Like khair. Do you understand? Does this make sense? And then a last verse that I want us to look at in Surah An-Nahl. It's 43rd verse. So 1643, sorry. Does anybody have it? The 16th chapter, 43rd verse, the Arabic or English? Yeah, go for it.
وما أرسلنا من قبلك إلا رجالا نوحي إليهم فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون.
Jazakallah khair, Sant. Yeah. Can you read the translation?
Okay.
Yeah.
We did not send messengers before you, O Prophet, except mere men inspired by us. If you polytheists do not know this already, then ask those who have knowledge of the scriptures.
Yeah. And so some of the translations are interjecting like some terms by extension, right? And contextually, if you read the chapter, it'll give you an insight on it. But essentially, the part that we want to look at is this understanding, fas'alu, that you ask. And who are you going to ask? Ahle dhikr, like the people of like understanding, of knowledge. when you don't know something, right? In kuntum la ta'lamun, you don't have the ilm of something, you go ask these people. Do you know what I mean? When you ask somebody a question, what are you hoping to get in response? An answer, right? What's an answer? It's speech, is it not? So you can extrapolate from all this stuff we're looking at multiple things, but for the purpose of what we're talking about here, like khair speech is rooted in talking about what you know you're talking about. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk about it. That's not khair. Do you know? So I should go ask people who know also means like if someone comes to ask me, I got to decide, do I know this thing or not? You don't have to feign humility. Like you know how to make wudu, then tell somebody how to make wudu, right? But if you don't know, then you shouldn't claim to know. And language is important. It's very different from being somebody who knows how to pray versus knows how to teach somebody how to pray. A lot of people give people a final form. We had 5 or 6 people take their shahada here like a few days ago. People remember, right? They got to learn how to pray. They're new to it. They have a legally viable excuse as to why they will do only the obligatory parts of the prayer and not the final form of the prayer that when we just prayed Isha, all of us prayed in. They have to pray when the next prayer comes in. What if they became Muslim just because they saw us praying through the window and they thought it was beautiful and they said, this is Islam, like this must be it. What are you all doing? And then it's like, you got to pray Isha now too, right? How are they going to know Surah Fatiha? How are they going to know like all the adhkar? But if you don't know like the answer, you don't want to claim you know. That's not khair, right? And you can preface it with language. This is what I know. There might be other opinions on this. Let's go ask somebody else who might know a little bit better. Do you know? But the desire to know is rooted in what exactly? Not necessarily like knowing as a source of contentment, but it can really easy borderline on the desire to be known or the absence of the desire to come across as someone who doesn't know. And in our tradition, not knowing is actually, and acknowledging that is a sign of like wisdom, not a sign of ignorance. Do you know? It's ignorant to claim you know when you don't know. You see what I mean? But understanding this at the other frame of it, if you set up the conversation, because when you ask, you're expecting an answer, and you went and asked somebody who doesn't know or doesn't have the base of knowing, like the question that you asked them, you're still going to get the speech that you get back in return. Do you see what I mean? So if I'm walking through like a conference bazaar where there's 30,000 people and somebody comes up to me and says, can I just talk to you? This is what I do, right? I say to them, here's my email, man. This is not a 5-minute conversation. I'm happy to help you and either talk to you or connect you to somebody who knows. Let's get on a Zoom. Let's have a phone call, right? But the response I get mostly is like, you're the first person who told me that. Most people will either just tell me like what they think, and it's confusing to me, or they say what I appreciate is that they'll say like, I can't be the one to answer this question for you right now, right? And it's a different level of care to be able to say to somebody, I'm not the one that can do this for you. Do you see what I mean? And so the twofold parts to it, that we're still drawing an ethic of this, right? Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyakul khayran aw liyasmut, that whosoever is consistently, habitually believing in Allah in the last day, let them utter good or be silent. We just looked at 3 verses in another hadith that talk to us about the ethic of speech, right? It's got to be taught the same way someone teaches you the mechanics of prayers. When you live in a world that you can go into bookstores that have like thousands of self-help books and self-development books and self-discovery books and books that teach you how to treat yourself theoretically, there's no section in the bookstore that teaches you how to treat others. This book teaches you how to treat others and how to treat yourself. The Prophet, ﷺ, who's the manifestation of that book, is teaching you how to treat others and how to treat yourself. Khair goes in every mode of communication. And this is what we said. Those three categories, khair, shar, laghu, it's good, evil, or futile, no benefit or detriment, manifesting in four different ways. It's either speech that's completely khair, it's speech that's completely shar, it's going to be completely laghu, like good, bad, or futile, or it can be a blend of khair and shar. And the non-verbalized parts to it are as important. And when you're not thinking it through and mindfulness is not there, the action and the intention have to go hand in hand. Does it make sense? Right? And we want to understand this part so that the focal point is not purely upon what is also important, like the things that the tongue is capable of that are like horrendous. Do you know? Because not doing bad is not the same as doing good. And Sharia's purpose is increasing benefit and reducing detriment. That is embodied in like building a shelter. Like, how do we get our community to build a shelter? If you do a case study, like, I'm so old, 6 years ago, what year is this? 2025, right? 2019, after we had ideated around the development of a shelter through a domestic violence agency that members of our community started, I thought it would take us 6 months to a year to raise $700,000 to purchase and renovate a shelter. In a week and a half, we raised $1 million from over 9,000 unique donors, right? Alhamdulillah. Do you think when we were raising that money, we got up and said to people, we think we're going to fail at this thing. There's no point. We think that nobody else does this elsewhere. We probably can't do it too. Were we saying like, this is something we're going to get done, right? Do you get what I mean? The positivity of it rooted in reality can enable like speech to be exactly what the Prophet ﷺ tells us it is. Some forms of speech are magical, like how they can transform and heal and change. And there has to be a focal point on what it means to have speech that is khair. Because you could turn the Quran into something that is also not beneficial. May Allah protect us from doing that. There's an instance where the Muhajirun and the Ansar, they have argumentation involving like a scuffle and an argument that takes place. And then they start calling each other, Ya Ahl al-Ansar, Ya Ahl al-Muhajirun, which in our understandings are noble like titles, right? But the way they were saying it to each other was divisive and derogatory. You are the Ansar, meaning we're the Muhajirun. You're different from us. You are the Muhajirun, meaning we are the Ansar. You're different from us. The Prophet hears this and he tells them it's jahl, it's ignorant. They're turning like beautiful words into words that are ugly. And the way that it comes across is from like the intention. The way that's coming from cross is the non-verbalized aspects of the communication. Do you know? If we looked at the last week or month of your life, how many words did you speak that were kind to yourself? And then think about how many words you spoke to yourself that were kind. And then in turn, how many words did you speak that were kind to somebody else? Because there's going to be a relation between those two things. Who gets to hear like kind words from you? When I say this like thousands of times, the best of you, those who greet those they know and those they don't know. The second hadith, towards the end of time, people only greet those that they know. Why? Why are you only greeting certain people? Why? Why aren't you greeting everybody, man? Who benefits from like your extension of salam? Do you see? And it's all rooted in this hadith. فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. There's a good chance if you're speaking words of hurt to someone, you're also probably speaking words of hurt back to you, which are not always like self-deprecating words, but words that justify vile behavior to someone. I'm the father. That means everyone has to listen to me. This is not a khair statement to make to your own heart. It's not. If I walk into my house and I think I'm the king of everything, I'm going to have to stand in front of Malik al-Mulk one day, who has real dominion over people and everything. Do you know? I'm hurting myself by speaking words that are categorically problematic. Me believing by virtue of a position that I hold that I am somehow better than everyone in my household, or they just have to do whatever it is that I say, right? If people have spoken words to you of khair versus words that are not khair, is going to also bear impact and acknowledging that and understanding that. And we want to start to balance in the way through this idea that is very real. Like communication has two parts to it, giving and receiving. Do you see? Even if you're communicating back to yourself and you want to communicate khair, which is not like delusional. Do you know? Honest, vulnerable. You did do that thing you shouldn't have done. It's the best thing for you to tell yourself in a non-self-deprecating way. وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, having conversations at times that understand me as a whole person. The story I probably shared before, COVID was like very difficult for our community and many communities. May Allah make it easy, right? A lot of you were here in New York. In the first couple of weeks in our community alone, we had more than 100 people who not only either they lost loved ones or died themselves, right? May Allah make them from the shuhada. Then we just stopped counting. Not even the first couple of weeks. I think like in the first week, 30,000 people died in New York on a whole that we knew of, right? And in the course of that, like, entire experience, you know, we have a big community. There's not so many of us that work here. And I was carrying like a lot of people's trauma. And I also was very sedentary. I didn't leave my apartment for 6 weeks. I wasn't exercising. I felt like completely off the wagon on my diet. So I hadn't eaten like processed sugars or anything like that for about 3 or 4 years. And now I'm like eating like everything my kids are giving to me. I got heavier than I've ever gotten in my life. I ended up herniating 2 discs in my neck. I had a variety of illnesses and all kinds of things. And I was in my apartment with my family, who I love very much, but I didn't have any like time where I was alone for months in a row. And I was exhausted. My wife said to me, you should go somewhere with your friends as we got towards the end of the year. And she said, I'll take the kids. And they went to visit my in-laws. So they flew to Michigan and I was home alone. And they left in the morning, and that night my trip got canceled. I was supposed to go with some friends of mine to Lake George, but COVID rates went up there. So now I'm sitting at home alone, and I haven't been alone for a long time. And I'm exhausted, and I'm like really exhausted. My body is like literally falling apart on itself. And I start to miss my kids and I miss my wife, which is not a bad thing. But in my tiredness, the memories also evoke other times that I felt alone. And I started to then remember times I had arguments with my wife and things that were difficult where I also felt like alone in some capacity. Make sense? My wife called me that night from Michigan. And every part of me wanted me to say to her, like, I'm so mad at you. But every part of me also saying, like, that's a stupid thing to say right now. So I had a 1-minute conversation. I closed the phone. I ordered a burger that I like to eat. I ordered a crepe from Creperie that I like to eat. I turned on a movie that I knew was going to make me laugh. And I got all of it. I turned off all my electronics. And I just engaged in that with intentionality of replenishment. The next day, one of my friends brought me to the Poconos with him. He skied. I couldn't because of my neck injury. So I just slept all day in this Best Western hotel that we were in. There was COVID like restrictions on restaurants. So we got takeout. We watched some TV at night. The next morning on the way back, we found a diner that wasn't observing COVID rules. So we went and ate there. Don't get mad at me, but we did. And then we hung out a little bit more. The next couple of days were similar things. It took me 5 days to get back to a place of homeostasis. At that point, I sat and had a conversation with myself to understand like what was going on with me 5 days earlier when I started to have like in my head an upsetness towards my wife for things that we hadn't even talked about for 8 or 9 years. If I tried to have that conversation in the moment of exhaustion, it wouldn't have made sense. Do you understand? وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. I've lived with myself every day of my life. I have to be in a place of comfort that doesn't have self-deprecation, which is also about how I speak to myself, to say simply because I'm human and I have exhaustion, like I have to then get to a place where replenishment defines the timing of the speech and my ability to give and receive based off of states that I'm in that have malleability, right? When you say kaif al-hal to someone, you're asking how is your hal, because a hal can be a state that has fluctuation. Does this make sense? Like I'm short. I'm not going to be tall. Do you know? I said to my son the other day, what would you do if I like came home next week and I was a foot taller? And he was like, Baba, that would be so crazy. He's like, but you're not going to ever be that tall. And I was like, you got my genes, man. You better relax the way you're talking to me. I cannot fundamentally change that, right? But states have capacity to change. You're sitting, you will be standing, right? You are sedentary, you will move. Do you get what I mean? You can be happy, you can be sad, you can be tired, you can be rested. The idea is to understand with consciousness, like, is this the time to really be talking about this? And if it's not, it's okay. You don't have to figure it out by tomorrow sometimes. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times you don't. And it all gets embedded into what the Prophet is telling us here. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. Believe in Allah the last day, speak good or be silent. In that moment, it was better for me to be silent about what I wanted to speak. Right? And understanding that sometimes that makes sense until the state that I'm in has like a fluctuation back to who I actually am in a state of balance and not what it is that is temporary that Shaitan wants to give more life to by adding variables that make this seem like it's the norm, but it's not. The norm is here. But 5 days means that 120 hours had to pass, and I had to be patient enough with myself that that was an okay thing for me to give permission to myself for. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Okay, let's do this. Because I've been talking for a good chunk of time. If you turn to the person next to you, what are you taking away so far? What is coming up for you? Let's talk about it for like 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. If you don't know the names of the person next to you, as more people have trickled in, please share some names, and then we'll discuss.
I consider that myself. So there sometimes like with human nature, you have to Could have like said something like that. That's like art. I want to be like, I want
Why are you still here? Why are you still here? Okay. Does she need to leave soon?
Huh?
Does she need to leave soon?
She's leaving right now. Like we just finished our meeting.
Is anybody still working?
I don't think just Junaid.
Like, is somebody gonna clean this up, or do I need to get people clean?
Junaid will. She's clearing out.
Maybe you can tell them to start putting it away.
I was gonna ask you if you're available tomorrow to meet with me at 9, but you're working remote, right?
I don't know. I just gotta see how my kids are doing. I just have to see how my family's feeling, how sick they are. I gotta take anyone to the doctor again. But Wednesday, I have this
So
whole
Wednesday's not the shoot day. We're shooting for Monday.
next week.
Yeah. But we do want to present to you a pitch for like the theme, the series. Give you a general idea. We want to do 4-minute video. Or
Who is the we?
Me and Mike.
Okay.
So we just have a discussion, kind of reviewing like with the.
Yeah, just tell me when you guys are free tomorrow. I don't know what this is. I gotta actually do the student hall bit tomorrow. Is she gonna be here in the evening?
She should be.
I could come after I get my son home from school.
Okay, what time is that?
But I don't even know if he's going to school. If he doesn't go to school, I'll be free early.
Okay.
Let me find out, and then I'll tell you. All right, so.
so many people, like, I started doing that. So many people like, need that they're all about.
Okay, what are some of the things we're taking away? What's coming up for people? Did your cookies get finished? It did? What bad people. Such bad people. No concept of sharing. Okay, what do we discuss? What are people taking away so far? What's coming up for people? Maybe we can have a few people. Yeah.
We talked about the power of self-talk. We kind of shared our experience with that. But that has more of an effect on us than we realize, at least for myself. So yeah.
Yeah, and everybody, do you know? Constantly, like, if you hear growing up, Allah's going to punish you for this. Allah's going to punish you for this. Allah's going to punish you. Why aren't you going to believe that Allah's going to just punish you for everything? Do you know? How many times did anybody say, like, Allah loves you for this or Allah loves you for that? And, like, you don't have to go far. There's verses in the Quran, like, that say, Allah yuhibbul, you know, X, Y, and Z, muhsineen, mutawakkilin, mutatahhirin, tawabin. Like, you're in a place where, like, those are actual, like, constructs, let alone that Allah says He is al-wadud. He's the source of love. So He loves you not because of who you are, but because of who He is, right? Because this is our creed. Like, our theology says Allah's, like, divine names, His attributes, they all have eternal beginninglessness to them, right? He is always these things all the time, every one of them. Do you know? So He doesn't stop being al-wadud, like, at a certain time. Does that make sense? And He's not like anything because He acted in that regard. So Allah is not al-khaliq because He created. Even if He had not created, He would still be al-khaliq. The act of creating does not denote, like, the title of creator. Do you see? Does this make sense? So recognizing, like, language and self-talk, that then I'm just, like, repeating what other people might have said to me, or I just say it to myself, because, like, the world sometimes doesn't make sense because people are not speaking khair through their actions. Do you know? How you treat people will come back to you. This is just in our hadith. How people, like, speak to one another, right? Min husn al-Islam al-mar'i tarkahu ma la ya'nihi. From the beauty of one's Islam is they leave that behind which does not concern them. So when somebody keeps just saying to you, like, why are you not married? Why are you not married? Why are you not married? That person's going to go home and their self-talk to be like, why am I not married? Am I not beautiful enough? Am I not this enough? Am I not that enough? Shaitan is giving continuity to the perpetuation of skewed perspective, which is what he interjects in an Adamic narrative of creation. Everybody sees Adam. Iblis is the one that sees him different from everybody. He wants you to see in a skewed way the way he sees things skewed. How do you skew perspective? Through language and self-talk, right? I say this to people a lot. If you said to yourself 20, 30 times a day, Khalid is stupid, Khalid is stupid, Khalid is stupid, then anything that come out of my mouth, you'd be like, man, this guy's so stupid, because the self-talk builds up a perspective. It applies the same way. If you tell yourself, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, do you know? Then why would you think you're anything other than you're stupid? Do you see what I mean? And the people around you, the way that they talk, the way that they say things, right? You absorb it. Do you get what I mean? The structures, the systems, when they cater only to privileged demographics, what is it saying to, like, the convert when they walk into the masjid and everybody speaks a language that they don't understand and they don't care? What does it say when, like, people take their shahada and then they're sitting in a diner by themselves on the day of Eid? These are things that speak like mountains into people. Do you get what I mean? Right? So what do you want to do? You want to put khair into things. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? Self-talk, like, super important. You wake up tomorrow, conscious exertion, speak positivity into yourself. Do you know? What else did we take away? What else did we discuss? Yeah.
Brother Noor, who was with me, he had a great point that, similar to this one, there's a hadith that whoever believes in his Lord in the last day, let him speak good. So just the idea of, everywhere around us, especially nowadays, like we're being recorded, everything's can be scrutinized in so many different ways. But if you follow this hadith and just like speak good and have a positive mindset, it solves so many of these problems of being just words taken out of context or wrong things being said.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Other takeaways? You can come in. Yeah, you can pray. Go ahead. Yeah.
I thought that the whole concept of recognizing when you are not at homeostasis and then practicing patience with yourself so that you can practice it for others is really interesting. And one of the things we were talking about is one, like, how do you develop that self-awareness to be like recognizing the moment, like, hey, like the way that I am reacting or the way that I'm feeling right now is not rational or fair to the other person, like you mentioned with your wife in that moment. And then when you do recognize it, what are techniques you can practice to kind of like pull yourself back and how to get back to that level of homeostasis?
Yeah, and then you answer those questions, right? What is your self-care strategy? The utilization of strength, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, doesn't render weakness, but the utilization of strength, devoid of mechanisms of replenishment, is then going to render exhaustion. And most of us are like super tired, right? If I walked around and told everybody to write on a piece of paper, tired or not tired, the majority of you would write that you were tired. Do you know? Why? Why are you so tired? Replenishment isn't I got to go take a vacation. Replenishment isn't I got to run away from reality. Replenishment is rooted in just having like a sense of balance to a routine that enables us to understand there's going to be some days that are heavy, some days that are light, but work-life balance isn't about creating equal halves, but it's an ongoing continuum that sometimes there'll be more work, but also sometimes there should be more life. And more life isn't that I sleep like nothing during the week, so on a Saturday and Sunday I sleep till 2 p.m. It's probably more damaging than waking up early on Saturday and Sunday also, because your body's not getting into a routine. It's not built, like we're not built to work as much as we work. That's not how Allah built us. We're not built to like consume as much as we consume. That's why Ramadan's a gift, and you got to like think deeply about it in a way that it's actually going to be replenishing, and then you have continuity to the replenishment. Do you know? You live in a society that teaches you to numb pain. Don't numb pain anymore, right? If I also went around and asked people, like, does your sleep schedule make any sense? Like most of you don't have a sensible sleep schedule, right? Frustrating situation, it'd be more frustrating if you're not sleeping enough. Do you know what I mean? The Prophet ﷺ, in a sum total of hours he slept in a day, still ended up being about 7 or 8 hours. It might not have been all at night, but there were different times that he was sleeping and replenishing and rejuvenating. Do you know? And just like we're distilling this, we only looked at 3 verses in one hadith, in addition to the hadith we're looking at, that just help us define and identify like speech to different frameworks. And you don't want to have self-deprecating understandings or like hostile understandings, but you just think, like, if the Quran mentions this so much, wouldn't it make sense that somebody is teaching me also these are like the ethics to speaking that Islam talks about? Do you know? But then that's like what you got to do when you got people around you and you start to say, just as it's important to understand the mechanics of prayer, here's the mechanics of like speech, right? And then you talk about like other stuff. Like, what does the Quran say, the Hadith say about wellness and self-care? It's a text that tells me so deeply about how I'm designed and what's going to be good for my design and what's going to be problematic for my design. Haram is not good for my design, right? And that's not putting your back against the wall, but that's just what it is. Do you know? There's people who said to the Prophet ﷺ that like, or the Prophet heard them saying rather, like, I'm just going to fast, like, I'm not going to sleep at night. I'm just going to pray. I'm not going to get married. The Prophet's like, I'm married, right? Like, I sleep at night. Do you know? I break my fast. Me, he's saying, like, you think you can do this thing better than me? He's a messenger of God. You know what I'm saying? He says, like, yourselves have a right over you. So fast, but eat. Pray, but sleep. Why? Because, like, your physical wellness is attached to most of your wellness. Do you see? And so bringing oneself to that place of recognition that is rooted also in, like, what the Hadith is framing this all in Iman, you got to believe that you're not lesser of a person because you're waiting and taking care of yourself. And somebody else is shaping your conviction and belief. You're like exhausting yourself in pursuit of what exactly? Do you know? And then it's going to make it harder. Who benefits the most from me not fighting with my wife? Is me, right? I'm scared of my wife, man. But if I yelled at my wife, like, or let it out in like a unhealthy mode of expression, it wouldn't have made the next 4 days replenishing. I would have been scared out of my mind. And I would have to deal with her being miles away and also upset. And the impetus of her leaving was also for me and my wellness, right? She tried to do something nice for me, and then I just yell at her because I'm not able to get to a place in my own maturation where I know myself well enough to say, this isn't the moment to talk. Do you see? And some of it's because you live in a world that teaches you your happiness is attached to things that do not make you happy. You want to know what's going to make you content? Pick up your Quran and read it in a way that you actually think it's a book of instruction, and then live by its teachings in a manner that understands that, like, you're choosing to forego replenishment when you're not equipping yourself through an understanding of the self, that the one who designed you has laid it all out for you. This is like what you're made to be doing. Do you know? And the Prophet still, like, laughed with people, spent time with people, ate with people, socialized with people. It's not either or. You don't have to go live in a cave and do nothing. If anything, our religion tells us to go out and change the world, right? But there's people who benefit from your exhaustion. It's not you. It's the ones who are taking your money because you don't know what else to do other than in a mode of exhaustion, thinking you spend something and it's going to create healing. It doesn't work that way fundamentally. Do you see what I mean? And I'm not saying this to be self-deprecating. I have been blessed to, like, serve this community and learn so much in that service. I know certain things that are spiritual gifts Allah has endowed me with, and things that, like, I have areas of improvement on. If I can do that, you can do it too. It's not rocket science. I know me, I live with myself every day of my life. The anecdote that I share with you of something that I did is, inshallah, to create benefit, not arrogance. May Allah protect me from it. But I know myself also enough to say, it's not that I hold something unique. And the minute you can realize that, you can bring yourself to those places also. Do you see what I mean? And self-care is going to be a big part of that, as is understanding in your convictions and beliefs. You have to be important enough to yourself to want to do that for yourself. I don't want to be the person who in knee-jerk reactions just starts, like, spitting fire in moments where fire is not what's necessary, like something that is much cooler is necessary, not something warmer, right? And I can't hate on myself because through the mistakes that I make, it creates a learning opportunity for me to understand capacity and boundaries that I shouldn't transgress, that then enable me to say, just because this is where I'm at now, doesn't mean that's where I will always be. But the interiority of self-reflection is not comparative. I'm not in a race against you. I'm just looking inside and trying to become the best version of myself. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. And it's an important part that the foundations are going to be like self-talk. Do you know? I'm sorry for people who have told you, like, you're just angry. They're wrong. Like, states can change. You can break down core belief structures and rebuild them if negatives need to be replaced with positives. and here, like, you believe in Allah in the last day, then understand, like, Allah believes in your potential more than you believe in your own potential. Why do you think he gave you, like, the things that he gave to you? Not so that you would self-deprecate. Do you think he created you because he made a mistake in your creation? Then who do you know God to be? Do you understand? It's just the vantage points and the perspectives, they're going to all be framed by how you talk to yourself about them. Do you know? And so even in the slip up, there's an opportunity for growth. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Why don't we do this? Let's take a pause here. Next week, if you want to, like, look this up, you can find all kinds of stuff online. We're going to look at, like, 2 excerpts of texts. Be great if people could look at them beforehand, because one of them is pretty long. Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, he has a text that many people know. His Ihya has a section that is on, like, just the harms of the tongue. Like, he calls it the banes of the tongue. Do you know? Like, stuff that's not good, you know, useless talk, lying, backbiting, slandering, these kinds of things. So we want to look at these things because we want to have avoidance of those, because some of these things are not situational. Do you know? It's always bad to claim God said something that God did not say. When somebody says something that sounds like it makes sense, but how can you fundamentally make that claim? Allah will punish you for this. How do you know that? That's as problematic as saying, like, Allah will reward you for this. The Prophet Ibrahim, who is Khalil Allah, he is making dua, Rabbana taqabbal minna, right? That, oh Allah, accept from me. Oh Allah, accept from me. Oh Allah, accept from me. Acceptance is in Allah's jurisdiction, not in my jurisdiction. Do you know? You think about the number of things people told you are haram that are not haram, right? Like, this is not a good thing to do. You understand? You paraphrase, like, statements that the Prophet, like, the Prophet said this, but he did not say this. Do you see? Like, there's certain things that categorically not good. Racism, never good, man. Doesn't matter. Your auntie's doing it, your grandma's doing it. They're just an older generation. Old school racism is the same as, like, contemporary racism. It's all bad. Do you know? Right? And we want to know it, not to be hating on ourselves, because we already said, like, positivity is a better mode of self-talk, right? But to also recognize, like, I have the potential to do this thing. When sorry, it's my mom. Assalamualaikum. मैं आपको 5 मिनट में करता हूँ मजी मैं से एक दर्श दे रहा हूँ Assalamualaikum. You want to know it because the potential is there, right? Wailul likulli humazatil lumaza, right? When Allah is telling wail, like, for the one who, like, slanders and gossips, may Allah protect us from this. It means I have the potential of doing these things. Do you know? You have the potential of lying. Do you know what I mean? But concretely, you want to understand it and, like, the different things that are there. So Imam Ghazali has this. He talks about, like, 20 different things that are potential, like, problems of the tongue. You go find the Ihya. As a text, it's like a long text. And a text that, like, you could try to read, but probably better to read with somebody. But this section is, like, something we're going to look at. He's got other, like, treatises and letters that he's written that also create, like, categorizations, 8 kind of harms of the tongue that are there. You just familiarize yourself with it, and then we can kind of go through them quicker. So now we're identifying what khair is by knowing what it's not. And this is a big principle in our tradition. We start to distill what something is by knowing what it's not. And so we want to focus on that next time. These things that are problematic, Allah protect us from them. And then we'll get into the latter 2 categories either next week, and we'll talk about them, or the following week, and then we'll move on from this hadith. The rest of this week, We're going to have all the other halakas that we normally would have during the course of the week. We have this weekend our 7th annual Black Muslim Initiative Symposium. I don't know if there's tickets left, but I think there might be some. You should definitely come to it. And I know we have like people in our community who've been here for years and people who also are like new and it's very transient, New York City, right? You don't have to be Black to go to this symposium. If anything, like you should go if you're not Black so that you can, one, experience like just amazing knowledge acquisition. And it shouldn't be predicated on us turning race into a symbol of religiosity, which some people will do, unfortunately. And two, it's important for us to be able to also understand and learn from one another and show up for others in ways that will still fundamentally benefit us. So I know our students and our volunteers and our staff are putting a lot into the running of this symposium. And for a variety of reasons, every member of our community would benefit from attendance to it. So you should go if you have time and you're in the area this Saturday. It's going to be an all-day symposium with an amazing speaker lineup. And then if you trickled in after we started, Yusra, who is an undergrad here, but also runs our women's initiative, has been doing an amazing job. Our women's initiative, mashallah, has been putting on all kinds of really great programs and events these last couple of months. This year is the 12th year that they're doing a drive that's called Sharing the Love that seeks to create care packages for women and children who are survivors of abuse, homeless, living in the shelter systems here in New York. And the care packages are made up of things that the shelters are in deep need of, right? And so it's not to pivot, but understand this in the frame of what we're talking about. Like you can speak a lot without saying a word. Do you know? And لِمَا تَقُولُ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ, somebody asks you, is it good to like help people in their time of need? Like, yes, it is. Then like, why don't I do it? You know? So the shelters are asking for specific products. There's already, because of inflation, like challenging times. There's grant funding that has been cut out by the current executive offices of this country that a lot of nonprofits that rely on those funds, they're not going to know what to do. Supply chains are exhausted, tariffs being introduced, like all kinds of stuff. In the broader scheme of things, who do you think is going to be remembered the most? Is it going to be like women who are survivors of abuse, living in shelters that are undisclosed for their own safety, that most of us don't even think about? And so these care packages have like diapers on them, feminine hygiene products on them, other things that are just fundamental basic needs. That like you don't have to throw down $1,000, $10,000. You got it, like put it down because it's going to go to people who have nothing. But also just $1, $5, right? Yusra passed around a QR code when we started that I saw some of you take a snapshot of. Does anybody have like a picture of it still on their phone? The QR code or the link open? Because I don't have it. But we sent out an email about it to our listservs. You can find it. It's all like on a wish list online, and the products are all getting shipped directly to the shelter. All you gotta do is like click the buttons, and then it'll be automated. Do you know? So please make sure you're doing that. This is the 12th year that it's being done. And at this stage in that campaign, this is the least amount of contributions that it's ever gotten. And we don't want that to be the case. So you find the link, share it with all your friends, like others, right? And what you're providing to people on the other end is that they're being remembered. They're not being forgotten. They're experiencing love, like in a very meaningful way to them that will help, inshallah, as they're navigating like this difficult experience in their life. Does that make sense? Okay. Is there anything else going on that I didn't mention? events, programs, things that we have happening. Okay. We made Isha right before we started. Is anybody going to make Isha right now that didn't pray? Everybody prayed?
Oh wait, on Sunday there's something.
What is there?
The Women's Initiative.
There's a Women's Initiative lecture here in the afternoon, right?
Yes.
On Sunday?
Yes.
You should definitely check that out. Also, and all the details are up on our social media and other things. So please do join for that. Okay. If people want to put their chairs against the wall, and feel free if there's any like stuff left that you want to snack on. We'll see everybody next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
What did you say?
Mug it.